Welcome to In Her Voice, a podcast created for women who listen to and live by their deepest wisdom, their inner voice. This was made for you, the woman who feels pulled to more, to lead, to create, to dream, and to be a world changer. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am an inner voice coach. Join me here each week as we explore what it means to reach for your inspired potential, all while honoring your worthiness each and every day. Hi there, it's Kelly, and you're listening to In Her Voice. And let me just say right off the bat how grateful I am for you. It is today, March 26th, 2021. And I was looking back through my March 2020 Instagram posts today, and it feels sort of like a dream this past year. Did it happen? I'm not really sure, but here we are. And I don't know about you, but this year has taught me so much, and it has showed me so much about myself. And I continue to learn from my amazing guests on this show, including today's guest, Audrey Holst. She helps people recover from perfectionism. So like right out of the gate, I adore her. And today we're having a paradigm shifting conversation about laziness. And it's not just like, let's talk about what lazy means. What we're actually talking about is the idea that laziness is a lie, that it doesn't exist. Okay, whoa, I know. And to be honest with you, I'm still not there. I've been continuing to do research and reading around this, but it is such a mountain to move in my mind, because lazy is just one of those words for me that my not so nice inner mean girl voice uses quite often, if I'm being completely honest. And but I think that for all of us, for every single person existing in this world, this is a conversation that we need to listen to, because it opens your eyes to a different view, to a different perspective. And we really need that. We really need that. So here we go. Let me tell you a little bit about Audrey. Audrey Holst helps people reform their perfectionism so they can reclaim their agency and put their full energy into what really matters. Her work uses a combination of mindfulness and neuroscience tools and combines over a decade of experience teaching yoga with deep knowledge of the nervous system and extensive training and work as a certified professional coach. Through her Fortitude and Flow process, Audrey guides individuals and groups through a holistic experience to shift the way they approach themselves and the things that matter to them for good. You are going to fall in love with Audrey just like I have, and I cannot wait to hear what you think about this conversation. Laziness is a lie. Here we go. Hello, Audrey Holst. Welcome to In Her Voice.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super psyched for this conversation.
Me too. Like I can't even tell you how excited I am. And I think it's rare that I have someone on the podcast who does something so similar to what I do. I mean, I'm an inner voice coach. You consider yourself, what's the actual thing that you call yourself?
I mean, a perfectionism reform pro. I mean, I don't have like a label for myself, but I'll just call myself that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, same. Like my inner voice coach is something that I made up because it felt like what was the right thing for me and what I do. But, you know, I deal a lot with my own perfectionism. We talk a lot about perfectionism on this podcast. I really help women cultivate their enoughness. And I feel like you're doing the same thing, but in different ways. And I love that so much. And so I'm super stoked to have this conversation. And we were going to sort of have this, I don't know, more of a general conversation. And then I happened to be on your website today, and I found an article that like gave me a brain explosion. And I said to you before we started, is it okay if we just talk about this? Because I believe in my soul that this is a conversation people need to hear. And the whole premise of this blog post that you wrote is that laziness does not exist.
Yep.
Excuse me? What?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't even know what to ask you. I'm just going to sort of let you go. Like, what the hell, Audrey?
Well, first of all, the title "Laziness Does Not Exist" is actually a title of a really incredible piece written by Devon Price. So that's important to like throw that out right there. And
Okay.
Devon Price, they are a social psychologist, and they've observed all of these behaviors that people typically label as laziness. But as they kind of draw it out, they're basically saying, I don't believe that laziness contributes to any of them. And that actually, if you're looking to predict or explain a person's actions, starting to look at the social norms and the person's context is usually a pretty safe bet, which is really, it's like put a pin in that concept, because when we get back to talking about perfectionism, like we're going to get back there. That is like a huge thing to talk about.
Okay.
So the concept is basically like, laziness is a concept that has been made up by a society that wants us to contribute in a very specific way that's been predetermined by people in power. And so it's kind of like this, and the effect it has on us is very visceral, right? To be called lazy is like being punched. It feels like an offense. That's how I relate to it, at least as somebody who's a reforming perfectionist, is, wow, that's really, I'm not lazy, right? There's this like, it's a horrible thing to be called. And it's, laziness is, again, it's a invented construct that people have used to shame others into doing what they want them to do, right? We'll just throw capitalism right out there. And something that I also talk about in this article, obviously, if you want to jump on my website, there's a couple of different breakdowns of this, but is the way that Pema Chodron talks about laziness. She is just an incredible individual. Pema Chodron is one of those people that, like, if you do not know who that is, you have to go start reading some of her stuff. Like, she's incredible.
I agree.
When Things Fall Apart is one of the best books that have ever been written. And, I actually picked that book back up when the pandemic started, and I just started reading it, like just from the beginning, just through, because she's just such a powerful writer. And so she talks about laziness in a couple of different contexts, and like what laziness might actually be. One of it she talks about as a way to seek comfort, which is sometimes it's like we're rushing. There's actually, laziness could be like rushing from one thing to the other. Like, actually, can be like a very lazy and typical behavior where it's like we're not actually ever processing anything. We're not thinking everything. It's just like go, 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 go. In our society, that could be considered a way. We're just looking for a life that doesn't hurt. So we're just trying to just like, go for it. So sometimes it's inaction, sometimes it's busyness, right? Those can be two manifestations. And maybe people may be like, I don't understand how busyness is actually laziness, but we can dig into that. I feel like the other one she talks about is the loss of heart. So that's like, we just feel like we've tried to be ourselves and we didn't measure up. Like, the way we are is not okay. And we just feel like our life is meaningless, and we just kind of stop. We just like don't know what to do. And so this becomes this sort of like how we act. And then there's also the cynic's laziness, which is, she calls couldn't care less. And that's just like, we feel like we just can't anymore. We feel like this world is disappointing and that person's disappointing. We feel mean towards ourselves. We made a mistake that we feel like we can't make up from. So she talks about it in these ways. And, and so those are just some of the context of the people and the references that I dig into in this article. But just to talk about it, in general, even in the perfectionism conversation, what we label as laziness is like a lot of the times just like human need for a break. You know, like,
isn't that something?
I mean, you know, and I think this is something that I have to keep bringing up over and over and over again. You know, depending on when listeners are listening to this episode, we are still smack dab in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's not normal. And trying to function so-called normal, you know, in our jobs, in our relationships, in our communities in a so-called normal way when this is happening is exhausting. Like, it's exhausting to our nervous systems. It's exhausting to our decision-making processes. It's exhausting for things that should be simple. Now we have to figure out our way around them. And being exhausted by something that is understandably exhausting is not lazy, right? There's this like conversation around you should be more productive now because now you're working from home, or, you know, which is not true for everybody, but you know, it becomes this sort of competition, like who's keeping their head afloat and who's not, and like making it very personal, and it's not personal, you know, it's not personal. So I just threw a lot of information out there, so I'm going to step back for a second.
Oh yeah, we're going to go deep. So I want to go back to this idea that Devin Price mentioned about laziness being this man-made construct to essentially manipulate people into doing what somebody else wants them to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that this, I mean, in context of so many upheavals that we have had over the past year, is so fascinating to me. In fact, what it reminds me a lot of is actually Sonia Renee Taylor, The Body Is Not an Apology. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Oh, I'm obsessed with her.
Okay,
so
right. On. So for those of you who don't know this book, I highly recommend you read it. It is about radical self-love. But she talks about in this book this idea of like essentially a ladder of achievement that we all find ourselves on, and that like somebody, a white man, created this ladder, and the things that are on this ladder are how big your body is or how small your body is, like what it means to be beautiful, what it means to be successful, all of these things. And it's just like this constant like climbing the ladder. And the only way to break down that system of oppression, which that's what it really is, right? Is to remove yourself from the ladder. And I feel like this is the same way. Like the only way to break the cycle that we're in that says this is what your life must look like in order for it to count is to say, I'm out.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think the phrase that you just used, in order for it to count, it really gets to the heart of a lot of these behaviors. And I'll just bring it back to perfectionism, because there is this sort of striving that constantly happens. And it's this sort of inner drive to like, in order for my life to be worth lived on this planet, right? In order for me to basically like pay my dues for existing, I need to do this, right? Yeah. I need to produce more. I need to prove that I'm worthy, right? There's this innate, like, you don't count until, right? You don't count unless you are hitting this very particular, very manufactured, mostly inhuman, robotic standard that has kind of been put out there. And, regarding what we relate to, right, these systems you're talking about, things like white supremacy, things like patriarchy, things like capitalism, these are the things we orient towards when we are orienting towards perfectionism. So if these are systems that you're like, nah, these are not things I want to support, these are not actually things that I think are good for society or healthy for people or the planet as a whole, then you need to find a different way. You need to orient towards something else. And so orienting away from that, orienting away from the labels of laziness, and actually orienting toward your own humanity and your own unique, what I call your unique operating system, is exactly what you said, is to turn away from those things, to get off that ladder, to stop orienting toward that in order for me to count and start questioning those stories.
Okay. So here's the question that everyone wants you to answer now. How do we orient away from laziness if literally like that is, I mean, I can't even, I feel like I'm almost speechless with all of this still because one, and I've shared this on the podcast already this year, one of my goals for this year is to honor my energy and flow and not just honor it, but to lean into it. And one of the things that I'm learning about myself is that my energy is like starts and stops, starts and stops, starts and stops. It's cyclical. And it doesn't cycle on like a 9 to 5 basis.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Even though I'm an entrepreneur and even though I work at home, like I feel like there's this, idea that these are the work hours and these are not the work hours. And this is how you should be living your life. And we've been taught that forever, right?
Yep.
Forever and ever and ever. So it's this whole paradigm shift. And, I have decided, okay, I'm going to start to pay attention to my own energy and like allow it to happen, not only without judgment, but like leaning into it, like gleefully accepting that I need a 2-hour break in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I am lazy. But what's interesting to me about that whole speech I just gave is it's still all about me not being lazy. I don't feel like I've stepped off the ladder, so to speak. I haven't reoriented myself away from laziness. I'm just shifting. I've done like a first step, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm still holding on. So how do I change that? How do I reorient myself to my humanity and away from this man-made construct of laziness?
Totally. Well, you've taken the first step, which is just to notice. First, we're so oriented towards. There's this thing I call the perfectionist 2-step, which is to see and fix, see and get it right, see and nail it. And it's something I see a lot with people when it's like they see something and they're like, well, I got to fix that. That's messed up, right? Or I got to I got to reorg my workday. Like, I got to fix this. And the first step is just to gather information, because a lot of the times we're not seeing the whole picture until we start paying attention. So the first process I always teach people is just notice, just pay attention and start gathering information in a really like objective, as judgment-free as possible manner, right? You start, just like you were saying, you start to notice that like, wow, I kind of cycle through these different energy levels during the day. And you may have different cycles during your week. You may have different cycles, during your month. You have all these different, sort of cycles. So just starting to pay attention to that is a great starting point. And then starting to kind of discern, okay, now that I notice this, like, what is a piece, like, what is influenceable around this? And like, what can I actually address? And what is one of those things that just like, I can just let go, right? Starting to discern where you can use your energy and how you can use your energy and maybe where you won't. And, in terms of like, what do you orient towards? So when I see people and when I talk about people in general, I see them as people having these operating systems, what I call their operating system, and this unique operating system. And we're all so different. And right, we all come in with this unique operating system, which is made up of our biology, our nervous system, our bodies. It's made up of our ancestry, right? The epigenetics of our ancestors. It's made up of our experiences. It's made up of their experiences. And so we all come in with these sort of pre-programmed, right? As much as maybe some of us think that we come into this world as like a blank canvas. It's just not true. Like we come in with stuff a lot of the times it's not necessarily ours, and which is continues to be influenced by the things that we encounter, through our lives.
Yeah.
So kind of having an understanding of, again, like, okay, like getting on board now with your own operating system and starting to figure out, okay, like, right, wow, I seem to, like, I'm really wired for, like, I have most of my attention and my energy first thing in the morning. So man, I got to get those important things like done first thing. Like that's where I got to put those tasks. Or like, wow, I realize that I have most of my creativity in the evening. So cool. I'm going to try experimenting, right? This is another thing that perfectionists want to get. Perfectionists want to get things right the first time. Like
100%.
I want to do it once and I want to do it right. And it's got to be exactly the way I envision it. So taking small, doable and experimental actions to try things out. So those are just some of the things that come to mind around like, okay, well now what?
Mm-hmm. I love this idea of experiments because I think of, if I were a scientist, which I'm not, but if I were, experiments are a good thing.
Yes.
Like they're actually like, it's actually a requirement.
Yes.
Like it's part of the day to day. That's how you prove a hypothesis. You have an experiment and then you see which one works, and there's no preconceived, or there shouldn't be preconceived notions about what should work going in, right?
Right.
So I'm curious to know, in your own life, what are some experiments you have run that maybe surprised you or changed the way you did things?
So one of the experiments that I've been running lately is my parameters and my boundaries around my schedule and my time. So I'll preface this by saying I have gone through many iterations of, and this is particularly around, and I'll just say this, like this is particularly around employment. This conversation in particular is around my business employment. So, and I know this may be different for everybody. So I've been through different iterations of my professional life, right? I've worked for a company, right, that had very specific, we open at this time, we close at this time. But even at that company, it was sort of not written, but looked upon that you actually get there early and you actually stay late, even though it wasn't in the, in the writing on the contract. That was the company culture, the unspoken company culture. And that was, observed. So I've worked, the jobs were, it was like very specific times that you worked in the morning to the evening. I've worked when I was teaching yoga, right? There are very specific times during the day, which are often the times that people are not working. So it's like early in the morning and late at night. So having times around that. And so I've had like really, really weirdly structured and strangely structured days throughout my employment process. When I started working for myself, right, and having my own company, my own practice, the first thing I did was like, well, screw that, right? Like, I can't stand that. I can't stand those like boxes and labels and, I just want to do what I do when I want to do it, like when I feel like it, right? That was like my first experiment. And that was kind of like nice, but then I realized that I could go a whole day and like not really know what I'm supposed to be working on and like not really feeling great about it. And then just like not making the progress on stuff that I wanted to. So I'm like, okay, like I want to make some plans, but I'm a little bit scared that it's going to get really, rigid. And then I'm going to I'm going to burn myself out. Right. Cause I'd had experiences with burnout that I didn't want to go through. Mm-hmm. So now it's sort of become that experiment of like, how can I start making some more plans or some more structure around my day? Like, what are the things that I want to get to, right? What are my priorities? And and even my calendar, right? Like looking at things. This may be so, for some people listening, they may be like, this is so dumb, Audrey. Like everybody does this. But for me, this is like revolutionary. You know what I mean? And that's it's important to like meet yourself where you're at, like have that level of friendliness towards yourself wherever you are and like be like, this is okay, right? Like I feel lame talking about it, but it's so true that I'm like, okay, now I'm looking at my first quarter and I'm starting to figure out, right, when I'm doing my marketing for certain things, when I'm, doing my content for certain things and starting to create a structure for myself that actually helps me. It actually frees up energy for me because I'm not trying to like reinvent the wheel every single day. Yeah. So for me, that's an experiment that's been ongoing for a long time, is that balance between not too much structure, but like not so free flowing that literally nothing happens.
And what I love about what you're saying, and by the way, same boat right here, we're paddling in it together. I feel like that's been my whole entire life. Like working towards figuring out, just like I want just enough structure.
Yes.
To keep me focused, because focus is challenging for me sometimes.
Same.
But I don't want so much that I feel like I'm suffocating in it.
Yes.
And, I think another example that I think of, and this is also funny. It's like, okay, well, how am I going to clean my house?
Yeah.
Right. So like some people are like, every Saturday we clean the whole house top to bottom. And other people are like, I do 15 minutes a day. And other people are like, I clean something when it's so gross, it disgusts me. That's kind of my MO right
Same.
there. We're soul sisters, I think, Audrey. But, I think what is empowering to me about these ideas of experimenting in the context of letting laziness go, right? Is that if that system of waiting till something is disgusting and then cleaning it is working for me, I am not lazy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
My mom might come visit my house and be like, what the hell are you doing? Because she cleans every Saturday top to bottom.
Yes.
And, I think, again, going back to that, genetic, the stories that are passed down, I think a lot of my laziness story comes from my mom. And, of her saying to me, I remember like when I was like a teenager, right? Like, why do you have to half-ass everything? She said that to me all the time. And, probably I was.
Yeah.
When I was 14, I was probably half-assing some things, most likely.
Like most 14-year-olds, probably.
100%. But like here I am, I'm 46, and I don't need to have that story anymore.
Totally.
And I'm still like, I still bump up against it. And I love this conversation so much about like giving ourselves permission to try something different.
Yes.
And to see how that feels. And it's funny because I have my Enoughness Planner, which is a monthly planner to help people cultivate enoughness, to help them feel good enough every day. And part of the system, if you will, is a habit tracker, a kinder habit tracker. And what I'm recognizing is essentially those kinder habits that people are choosing each month. That's just another way to call an experiment. Yes. I'm going to experiment this month with this thing and see if it works.
Yes.
And if it does, I'm going to keep it. And if it doesn't, I'm not going to keep it. So like last month I experimented with time blocking. Didn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't work. Yeah. And you know what? I am okay with that. Yes. That doesn't mean anything about me. It doesn't mean that I am not good enough. It doesn't mean that I can't figure it out. It just means that I'm me and time blocking doesn't work.
Yes.
And it gives us so much freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't spend this extra time, and I see this with clients all the time. It doesn't have us wasting our energy on trying to fix things that aren't a problem. Like there becomes this conversation, especially when I first start working with clients, it's like they're coming in and it's like they have so many things they want to workshop because there's so many things. And this is not necessarily their words, but it's like the energy around a lot of the questions is like, there's this thing that's like really messed up and that like I keep doing and I need to fix this thing. And it's like, well, let's look at this slightly differently. Like there actually may not be a thing here that needs fixing. And a lot of it is so one of my superpowers is looking at a table of like a billion different pieces and being like, oh, I see a big picture here. Or, oh, did you see this? Or like, oh, have you considered this? Like I'm a really good putting pieces together kind of person. And it's one of my gifts as a coach is helping people to sort of see those pieces themselves and then start to do that on a regular basis. So it's not just me having to be there pointing out for them. They're actually starting to learn like, oh, actually, this doesn't mean anything about me. This is not, stop making meaning out of a thing about who you are as a person or as a quality human being, and see it as an act, see it as a behavior, see it as a thing that happened, right?
It's neutral. It
See
doesn't
as
have to
normal.
be charged.
Yes, exactly. See it as normal. And that becomes the more sort of word that gets used over time. Like, this is normal. Like, this is normal. This makes sense, right? That's one of the questions I would encourage people to start asking themselves on a regular basis is like, how does this make sense? Like, how does it make sense that I feel this way, right?
Yeah.
How does it make sense that this is the way that I act? How does this make sense that this is upsetting to me? And first making sort of, and if you can sort of wrap your head around that, sometimes that's like a first step just to, and sometimes you can't, right? No big deal. But if you can sort of make sense, it kind of helps you get on your own side a little bit quicker, and then you can make some decisions from there.
Yeah, and you know what else I like about that how does this make sense question? Is it also allows us to get clear on our beliefs versus someone else's beliefs.
Yes.
Right? And that, to me, is one of the most life-changing abilities. Like, that's a skill. It's not a talent. It's a skill that we can develop over time, and we can practice it. And we can start to say, oh, wait a minute, that's not mine.
Yes.
You know, we can learn about where something came from and say, oh, I don't have to own that. I don't have to like carry that with me if I don't want to. And I feel that like so much of the past decade for me has been like unpacking. Like, it's like I have this ginormous backpack of other people's shit.
Yep.
And I'm just like pulling stuff out and like holding it up and like asking that question without realizing it. How does this make sense? I'm like, it doesn't. Goodbye.
Yes, totally.
And it feels, at first it felt really scary.
Yes.
Because I was like, if I'm not carrying this thing that I've been carrying this long and everyone thinks that I have that, everyone thinks that that's in my backpack. And if I just let it go, what does that mean about who I am? That can be a little bit scary.
Yeah.
But I think also the more you do it, you're like, oh, my load is much lighter now.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, that scariness, a lot of the scariness comes from the way I look at perfectionism. I look at it from the perspective as this is a survival technique. This is something we've learned for a lot of us from like a young age. This was how we got by. This was how when we didn't have a lot of autonomy, when we didn't have access to resources, when we were small and under other people's care, perfectionism is a way to survive. And for a lot of us, right, that kind of gets wired into us as we grow older, but we just don't think about it as anything other than like how we are. You know, like we don't think about it as, oh, this is a survival behavior. Like, this is why this shows up the way it does. So when we start making changes, and you know, like our body is, and this is one of those things, like I don't love terms like self-sabotage and stuff like that, because I really feel like your body is on your side. It's trying to be on your side at all times, right? Like your nervous system is trying to do the thing that it thinks is what is needed to keep you safe. Mm-hmm. And so that's why noticing is like the number one on my list of like, if you want to start unpacking and unvelcroing some of these things, is you got to just start noticing, because it helps you kind of step outside of that survival and like kind of get a different take on it. But like when you start rewiring survival mechanisms and we start creating new behaviors around things that have been in a groove for so long, there's a physical component to that, right? Your nervous system is physical. There's a physicality in your body that actually clicks as like, this might kill us, right? There is that actual response that happens in your body that says, we might die if we do things differently. And that sounds so dramatic. Like, oh my gosh, if I, you know, text my friend and say that like, I'm so sorry, I need to cancel plans, but like something happened, we feel like this friend is going to desert us, and then we're going to end up, you know, in a ditch by ourselves for the rest of our lives, right? It's like kind of like the story our nervous systems can tell us. So, I think that scariness is really important to talk about and just normalize. Like, yeah, it does feel scary, and there's nothing wrong with you that it feels scary, even if it's something so mundane that you're like, logically, I should not be scared of this, but physically, I feel terrified.
Yeah, and I feel that some people that are listening might even like this idea of letting go of the word lazy, that might be something that's scary. Like, well, okay, if I'm not always trying not to be lazy, then am I going to get anything done?
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is this, I'm trying to see, I can't remember the woman's, is it Leslie Kinzel? Two Whole Cakes. Do you know about her?
No.
I think it's Leslie Kinzel. I can double check this, but I think it's Leslie Kinzel. She wrote this book called Two Whole Cakes, and this was actually brought to my attention by my editor as I'm writing my book. And it's this concept of like, if I let up on myself, right? I'll just use those words. Like, if I let up on myself, if I stop being, like on top of myself in terms of like, well, you got to do it this way, and like if I start to let up, then I'm just gonna like go into the kitchen and eat 2 whole cakes, right? That's her. That was her like feeling of when in her particular instance, she's talking about like food and dieting and all the damage of that culture. And her thing, well, like if I let up on myself, if I let myself go, I'm gonna go into the kitchen, I'm gonna eat 2 whole cakes, right? And so for us, or for me, right, perfectionism, especially with this word lazy, if I let go of that lazy word, right? If I stop, pushing myself, then I'm going to go lie on the couch all day long and stare at the ceiling and literally never do anything again. And I'm just going to waste away and do nothing productive in my life ever again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a real fear.
Yeah.
Like I don't have that anymore. I used to, though.
Yeah.
I used to. Well, and let me be completely transparent. I mostly don't have that anymore.
This stuff doesn't like, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it never 100%, and like, that's important too. It's like, this stuff, in my experience at least, it never like 100% just magically disappears and into the ethers and like, all of a sudden we're like this transformed human being
right.
that never is bothered by anything. But like, it becomes more of like a sort of like whisper or like a ghost of the past, as opposed to like this screaming demon in the present,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if we get to the heart of it, that all of this, right? The laziness, anything that we might be scared of, any story that we're carrying that seems scary to let go, letting go of perfectionism, right? All of these things, ultimately, the steps that we take towards letting them go is all about loving and accepting ourselves right where we are.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to. Without being able to love ourselves, without being able to say, in this moment right now, no matter what I have done or I haven't done, I am worthy, I am good enough right now, then there's always going to be that specter of something hanging over us that we could try harder, we could do more, we could be better. And understanding that loving yourself and accepting yourself fully doesn't mean that you're not going to grow and change anymore.
Yes.
That's a hard thing to wrap your head around, because I think it really requires us to hold both things in one hand, right? To hold that I am good enough now and that I am also allowed to transform and grow and change.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much a lot of just the holding the two things in the one hand is also just a conversation around the concept of both and, which was another thing that was revolutionary for me. The either or, right or wrong conversation is a very survival oriented conversation.
Well, that's how perfectionism works.
Yes. Yep.
Right. There's no in between.
Yep. It's this or that. It's either or. It's right or wrong. And it's not how things, it's not the reality of the world. It's not the reality of people. It's not the reality of you. You can both, and this is something another thing that I think is worth pointing out, that again, these are realizations that I'm just talking about because they were so helpful for me to sort of start to unvelcro from perfectionism, is like, the reality is you can be the most compassionate, empathetic, good-hearted, good-natured, good-intentioned person on the planet who, uses all of the correct language and really like tries your best to be on the right side of everything. And you know what? You're going to disappoint people. You're going to make people angry. People aren't going to like you. You're going to, run into conflict.
You're still going to get it wrong.
You're still going to get it wrong. Somebody's going to have some sort of opinion that they don't like about who you are or what you're saying. And like, that's part of the reality that we have to get on board with, because a lot of the reasons why a lot of us, and this myself included, have clung to perfectionism is like, I don't want to get into that, right? I don't want to get into the conflict. I don't want to make anybody mad. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to, I don't want to get into that. But it's like, if you can get on board with the reality that these things are going to happen, like, it's going to happen. And so let's just start moving forward with the reality that you're going to disappoint people. End of story. There's no way to get around that. That frees up the ability to actually move, right? Like, otherwise we get paralyzed. We get into this freeze state of like, well, I can't do anything because I don't want to mess things up, right? Forget it. Forget about it.
It's like what you said about like, we have to make that normal.
Yes.
Like, that is normal. It is normal to disappoint people.
Yes.
It is normal to get it wrong some of the time.
Yeah, like mistakes, right? Like, like to fail or make a mistake. Again, these are big words that are really scary. But again, it's normal. It's normal. It's like not even a thing that should be even like a mistake. Like, what even is a mistake? It's something that didn't go the way you thought it was going to go. Like, well, welcome to the planet. You know what I mean? You
know what it reminds me of is that quote. I feel like I'll probably get it wrong, but it's Brene Brown. And she says, I'm here to learn. I'm not here to get it right.
Yeah.
Or it's something along the lines of that. Like, when we can let go of like having to be right all of the time.
Right.
The world becomes full of possibility.
Yes. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in really quickly.
Yeah,
go for it. Just to talk about, again, when we're trying to get things right, when we're not trying to screw things up, again, a lot of these things, when we behave in these particular ways, we have to be very aware. If through this behavior, am I continuing to perpetuate and honor white supremacy? Am I continuing to perpetuate and honor patriarchy and the really negative effects of capitalism, right? Those are those things, right? When we do certain behaviors and we hold ourselves to so-called perfect standards, be very aware about the manufactured nature and why these things exist to begin with, and start to question, is this something that I actually think is in the best interest of my own humanity, the humanity of the people around me, and again, just humanity as a whole?
So powerful, Audrey. I mean, to have this conversation in the context of oppression, for me, okay, so this is funny. For me, as a recovering perfectionist who wants to be right, it's empowering to me to like come at it from that context.
Yes.
Right? It helps me to see like, I am against white supremacy. Yep. I am against the patriarchy. Like, I am against oppression of people that have different color skin than I do. Right? Like, I am there. That to me is very black and white and right and wrong. And so if I want to be on the side of right, what does that mean for me?
Yes.
It's more than just words, right?
Yes. Yep.
It means like taking that big wall or like building that has been built down brick by brick.
Yep.
So like diet culture. And I mean, the list is long, right?
The list is long. Yep.
I feel that this conversation in that context, that has been what has most empowered me to really take a stand for loving my body at whatever size it is.
Yes.
More so than like what health means, more so than even loving myself fully. And it is about loving myself fully, but more so than all of that, it's this idea that this was created to keep people down.
Yes.
And that is not right. That is not right.
Yes. Yes.
Ooh,
I just got chills on that one.
I know. Oh my gosh. Well, so to wrap up, I want to go back to the word lazy, because you mentioned the three things that Pema Chodron said that you could use, sort of like that you could identify what we consider to be laziness as really. And it's this idea of like needing comfort or needing rest, right? And then the second one was like feeling like we have lost heart, like that we just don't measure up. And then the third one is the sort of couldn't care less.
Yes.
Like it's all like nothing's ever going to go right. And that's not something that I can identify with personally, but I feel deep sadness for people who are there.
Totally.
Because I think when we can start to recognize that this thing we call lazy is really pointing us in the direction of something that we need and something that either we can give ourselves or that we could ask for.
Yes.
Then it's a completely different conversation that we have with ourselves instead of beating ourselves up because we didn't do X, Y, and Z or because we took a whole day off. Oh my God, gasp, right? We can say, oh, wait a minute. Yesterday I felt really lazy. What actually was that?
Yes.
That was me really needing a break. It was me needing to numb out because I had a really hard week with my kids.
Yep.
Right? And then we can process through that. And so that even just shifting the language around it allows us to have so much access to understanding and loving ourselves. And I just love that so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, even Pema Chodron, right? She would write about the antidote is self-compassion, right? Is starting to practice that, which for a lot of us feels like the most uncomfortable thing that we can even conceive. And, you know, if that's where the outside of your comfort zone is, right? And for a lot of people, like we talk about being outside of your comfort zone. And for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable to take time. It's uncomfortable to rest. It's uncomfortable to cultivate a perspective and to give yourself that self-compassion. So if that's where the discomfort is for you, that's the outside your comfort zone. And that is worth leaning into.
Mm-hmm. What are some ways that you practice self-compassion?
So I think, you know, practically speaking, making sure that I am really trying to give myself the benefit of the doubt around my behaviors, around the things that I do, around, you know, the standard. And it's still the standards, right? The standards of success is something that's really hard for me. And still to this day is like, not sure how to find the balance there, you know, like, am I doing this right? Like, am I, you know, around business too, especially, right? Like, if it's not getting the results that I think I should be having by now, does that mean, you know, what does that mean in terms of success? What does that mean in terms of what needs to change? I don't really know a lot of these answers. So like doing the best I can to show up, again, do the best I can with the resources I have and then trying to learn and continuously move forward in a way that I think is best. And like just knowing that that's all I can really do, which is a very frustrating and also sort of freeing way to be in the world. Yeah. And that for me is like one of the best ways to sort of show compassion towards myself is how I treat myself in these moments and then what I do, you know, the actions I take.
I love it. I love it. Audrey, I feel like we could go double. I say that, I feel like all my listeners, I want to ask you a question. Do I say that every single time? Because I feel like I say it every time. I just have such good conversations with my guests.
Oh, it's so fun.
Oh, so fun. So why don't you let people know how they can connect with you online, where they can learn more about you?
Yeah. So if you're a social media person, I spend the majority of my time over on Instagram. I find it to be the most accessible platform. So I am at Fortitude and Flow on Instagram. But if you go to my website, which is fortitudeandflow.com, and you go to fortitudeandflow.com/podcast interview, there is actually a series of noticing meditations that I can lead you through that can help give you a little bit of a taste of what I'm talking about with this noticing practice. Like, what do you mean to notice? What does that actually mean? And it'll actually lead you through that just to kind of give you a taste of what it might look like to start practicing something like that and to start kind of getting yourself out of this perfectionism loop.
I love that. I'm going to check those out for myself. And then lastly, of course, my favorite question, what's your inner voice, your voice of wisdom saying to you these days?
I like my inner voice, I think is telling me it's gonna be okay.
Yes. She's so wise.
So wise. Sometimes it's like, you know, from the bottom of the well, there's this tiny voice coming up and I'm like, I see you and I hear you, but woo, man, hard to hear sometimes.
In a question that I journal on, like that I ask myself in journaling a lot, like multiple times a week, is what do I need to hear today? You know, it's sometimes how I wrap up. Like a lot of my journaling is just, you know, hot mess inside my head, getting it out.
Yeah.
But then when I get through all of that stuff, then the juicy parts come, and a lot of times that's when I'll ask that question: what do I need to hear today? And Audrey, I can't even tell you how many times my inner voice says to me, everything's going to be okay.
Yes.
You're doing a good job.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
I'm proud of you.
Yes.
You know, like these lovely, encouraging words that I thought for a really long time could only come from someone else.
100%.
Right? Oh, I just love it so much.
Oh,
okay.
So
well, I feel like this will not be your first time on my podcast, because we need to make like a regular event of this.
Down.
I had so much fun. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I'm going to put links to your website and Instagram in the show notes. And I will also put the link to the noticing meditations. Yeah. And if I can pull my act together, no judgment if I can't, I will put links to the articles and the books that we talked about as well.
Sure.
So I will try to find those, because I think that I know I'm interested in checking them out, and I know my listeners are too. So for all of you listening, you should be able to find all of that in the show notes on my website, or by clicking right through in your podcast app that you're listening to. So Audrey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
All right. I know that was a conversation that might be mind-blowing to you. And honestly, this was recorded. Let me look at the date. February 10th. So I've had a month and a half to sit with this, and I'm slowly making my way through Devin Price's book. And I'm still blown away by the concept. It's almost like it does not compute. But I love the way that it challenges me to think about things in a different way. And that's how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how we begin to understand the world around us and continue to understand the world around us. And I think that it's just such a powerful conversation that we can be having with our souls about what we call laziness and what we label as being lazy, not only in our own lives, but also in other people, with other people. I would love to hear what you think of this. I mean, I am really curious, like super curious. So the best way to get a hold of me is to DM me over on Instagram. I'm at Kelly J. Covert. And Audrey is over there too. And her Instagram handle is at Fortitude and Flow. So I want you to let us know. Let us know how revolutionary this is to you, to be thinking about it. And also like what you can do with some of the strategies that Audrey gave. For example, the 2 steps: gather information, pay attention, and then step 2, discern. I really love that. And I am almost without words, because I just feel that this is a conversation that I never in my life imagined having. And we just did it. We talked about how laziness is a lie. So let me know what you think. Also, a quick reminder, if you are listening to this in real time, the next Enoughness Workshop is coming up on Tuesday, March 30th, 2021. And the Enoughness Workshop is about cultivating your enoughness, that feeling of feeling good enough every single day, cultivating that feeling through kinder habits that are steeped and started in your desires. It is a 90-minute Zoom, and we do some deep guided journaling. We do a little bit of meditation. It's a really beautiful 90 minutes, and it is a gift you can give yourself. So if you would like to register for the Enoughness Workshop with me, you can head on over to kellycovert.com/workshop and go ahead and sign up there. If you're listening to this past the date, that page will still be there, and you can either see when the next Enoughness Workshop is coming up and register for that, or you can put your name on the wait list to be notified the minute I know the next date. So again, that's kellycovert.com/workshop. I would love, love, love for you to join me, because this is the work that we do. This is the work that we do as recovering perfectionists, as women and people who want to feel good enough, who want to find contentment in the everyday. I don't know about you, but that sounds really, really great to me. So remember this. We need you. You showing up in this world as yourself, your whole self, all of you, flaws and imperfections included. It really does matter. It really does make a difference. You are worthy.